Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing well. I want to talk about Syria. There's activity there. I can't say again, it continues, but we want to talk about a little bit of what's going on over there. And in some ways, we have mentioned a little bit of improvement. Maybe Syria would be Syria again, but it doesn't really quite look like that. We see some figures that indicate who's getting a piece of the pie, and I don't know how much the Syrians are going to get, but it is claimed now by our government that we have 30% of Syria. I wonder if the American people know about that we have just taken 30% of Syria. And the Kurds, an important neighbor and occupier and live there, they claim they might have 25% of Syria. And the Turks now, and that's one of the things we'll talk about, is the Turks are getting antsy, and they have warned the Syrians, and now bombing the Syrians. They're getting very much involved, and they're very worried, and they want a hunk of it. Israel's very active right now, more active than they have been, and they want a piece of the action too. So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen on this? What part will the Syrians actually end up getting? I mean, Assad is stronger now than he was a year ago, but still, it's going to be maybe a long time before we think of Syria as Syria once again.
Yeah, he is stronger, and it's because his allies, the Russians, and to a lesser extent the Iranians, came in to help him. They helped him defeat, the Western and Gulf state-backed jihadist groups and really fought them off. But now we're sort of going back to 2013, where the whole idea really is, okay, the ISIS thing is done. Now the real thing is we've got to get rid of Assad, and we want to get some territory. Erdogan, the Turkish leader, even said recently, talked about restoring the Ottoman Empire, the areas that were controlled by the Ottomans. But the American one is important, and the fact that, as you said, most Americans probably don't realize that we are occupying a large chunk of Syria. And I saw the 30% number, and went back to try to figure out, where did I read that? Turns out it was Rex Tillerson. Here's what he said on 13 February in Kuwait at a conference. Listen to this. This is the no nation building policy. This is the stop invading nations policy of the Trump administration. Here's what he said. The United States and coalition forces that are working with the U.S. to defeat ISIS today control 30% of Syrian territory and control a large amount of the population and control a large amount of Syria's oil fields. This observation that the U.S. has very little leverage or role to play is simply false.
You know, when I heard that, I thought, well, do the American people know really what's going on? And your response was a little scary because if they did, a bunch of them are going to cheer it on. They won't even look at it for what it really is. But we are an empire, and we are determined to maintain it. And this is just part of this maintenance work that we have to do. But I can see no good coming from this. And the most recent incident has been that yesterday Turkey warned what was going on in Afrin, and the Kurds were being helped, and they said, don't do it, don't do it. The Syrian government was, I guess, giving these Kurds support, and they warned them, and lo and behold, today, I guess it was today, in the last 24 hours, they started bombing this area, and it looks like there'll be troops involved. I'm sure Turkey has troops involved already somewhere, but certainly the whole idea that it's not an official open policy that we have invaded Syria for the purpose of taking control of Syria, 30% is almost like we're doing a good job and soon we're going to have control of this place. It is so arrogant and so useless. And facetiously I said, with a little bit of risk, where's the UN when they need us? But obviously I don't believe the UN is the solution. Matter of fact, it's the moral hazard of the UN and internationalism that does this. An American first foreign policy would not be getting us involved in that stuff. That is deep state foreign policy, and it's international nationalism, and it's it's all the neocon stuff. The neocons must love this stuff, this aggressive nature that we portray here.
Exactly, and the reason why we wanted to talk about this today is because it is kind of breaking news because of the situation in Afrin. As we know, just a kind of a quick timeline of events, the U.S. announced a few weeks ago that we're going to create a 30,000 strong force of Kurds to guard the border. The Turks said, "Oh no, you're not. This is not going to happen." So they started military operations in Afrin, which is in northwest Syria. They started an operation against the Kurds there and warned the U.S. that it would attack the Kurds at Idbak's over in Manbij next door. And so what happened then is that the Kurds found themselves isolated because the Americans told the Afrin Kurds, we have nothing to do with you. So they were stuck trying to make a deal. What are they going to do? Turkey has invaded Syrian territory. And so they finally made a deal with the Syrian government. Hey, we need some help. Come up here and defend the territory. And that apparently is what is happening today. I don't believe it's regular military forces, but Syrian militias, Syrian government-affiliated militias that have started moving into the area, and the Turks immediately responded with some mortars fired onto the column of militia.
And I always wonder how can they keep all these factions identified? There's basically the two groups is either pro-Assad or anti-Assad, and that's how it all got started. But then we have all these groups coming in, and there's 7 different groups that Israel supports, and they're probably Sunni people that are against the Alawites, and they don't like this secular moderate government, and where Assad was not interested in having ISIS, and yet it's a wonder that they can keep track of all this, and I can't imagine how this is going to be settled easily. How many more people are they going to kill? In order to solve this, and how many tens of thousands? I mean, this has been going on a long time, and it's not Trump. Trump hasn't, from my viewpoint, hasn't really helped anything. He's exacerbated and increased it. But this is bipartisan. It was Obama. The announcement in 2011 had to go, and then this division isn't just clumsy planning. Some people actually believe this could have been very deliberate. It's the confusion of breaking up the country that would cause the chaos for the good guys that come in, and our side believe we're the good guys. We'll come in and we'll put our guy in charge like we've been doing since 1953, since we decided to put the good guy in charge of Iran, and we're still suffering the consequences.
Well, the U.S. is determined to not allow Syrian government administration and forces to go back into areas where ISIS has been cleansed from. So they're trying to put their own people in to occupy this territory. But the other thing that's going on subsurface or semi-subsurface is really U.S. attacks on Russia in Syria, because the U.S. is trying to dislodge the Russians. I don't know if they're full of pride or if they believe their own propaganda, but I think they're trying to dislodge the Russians. And we've seen a few things that have happened recently. We saw the shoot down of the Russian plane, possibly using shoulder-fired rockets that the U.S. has provided with them. We saw the U.S. attack on Syrian forces near Deir ez-Zor, where Russians were killed. So we're seeing the U.S. engaging the Russians. The question is, what will happen? What will the Russians do? Have they invested so much in propping up and helping their ally to back away? The last thing I think they want is to engage. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said a couple of days ago, when asked at a conference, well, what should happen for things to calm down in Syria? And he said the U.S. should leave. Which is
well, I think that's something that we had suggested a long time ago. But they're on again, off again. You take the position we have with the Turks. They're one of our allies, and yet we're fighting over this. And even when there's potential conflict between American troops and Russian troops, I think the leaders sort of have an agreement that this is not a good time for us to have an open war, and they sort of back off and have some agreements and think that we can calm things down. But it doesn't change the overall picture. It doesn't change the attitudes between the perpetual war between Sunni and Shia and the leadership of Syria. And it doesn't change, the attitude about the Turks. The Turks aren't going to just roll over either and say, well, America tells us to do this. They're pretty independent. And I think the bigger picture also is the loss of credibility of the United States government, prestige-wise as well as ability-wise. And also, if we are truly nearing the end stage of our empire, and that we will not be able to maintain it, I think that's another thing that's gnawing away at this. And right now, it's like we're getting bogged down. But ironically, we got bogged down in Vietnam, the Russians got bogged down in Afghanistan. Now we're bogged down in Afghanistan, and the Russians are not so much bogged down, but they're bogged down with us. And I think Russia would like to be less involved in Syria. I think they would, but they have their business and their excuses and their allies, and they're in their home territory there. But it's pretty much of a mess that is not going to go away easily. And the solution, obviously, for so much problems for us would be just for us to come home. And it would be such a blessing if that happened for a lot more people than just the American people. But the American people would be better off, and we would not for 1 second be less safe. I believe we'd be more safe.
Yeah, absolutely. But the sad fact is the U.S. has absolutely no intention to leave its occupied parts of Syria. We talked a few days ago, we talked about Trump's 25 cents a gallon gas tax, and that was going to help fund his infrastructure programs. I don't know if Americans realize this, if most Americans realize this, but last month, Secretary Tillerson, when he spoke at the Hoover Institute, he announced that the U.S. is actually involved in nation building in that section of Syria that it occupies. The U.S. is spending hundreds of millions of dollars building roads, building bridges, doing all sorts of things, rebuilding eastern Syria, where the oil fields are, ironically. So we're building nations in eastern Syria while we're going to tax Americans here at home.
And I think you would agree that it's not designated in the budget that somebody can go down the line item and say nation building in Syria. I mean, there's probably nothing designated for that. And that's why these budgets are so fungible. And whether it's the DOD budget, the State Department, the foreign policy budget, and it's all one big budget, and there's very little control over how it's spent. So yes, the ongoing thing is I think that if we can throw our weight around, and if we seem to be winning militarily, then we have to have nation building, which has not done so well over the years. What nation have we ever really built that we can claim? The nations that have done well after we invaded them did well after we left, and they seem to do a lot better once we got out of the way.
And the ones that did well are the ones that also did well beforehand, like Japan, had a pretty sophisticated economy, although I guess we never left. But I think, if the final word I would say, if I may, is I think things are lining up where a major conflict is brewing there. The U.S. believes a lot of the neocon propaganda. Unfortunately, the administration has been so sucked into the neocon propaganda that they're not seeing straight. War is coming. The U.S. is poised to have a direct conflict with Russia and/or Turkey. There are so many different sides fighting with each other in Syria. It's an extremely dangerous situation.
I'm afraid you're right. I think we're gearing up for that. I think the neocons are alive and well and really promoting these policies. But, if Trump were a truly strong president, which he, comes across as a strong person, if he could only, go back to his roots, his gut instincts of the campaign on dealing with what type of relationship we should have with Russia, it would be so much better. But right now, if anything, he has drifted. So the question that a lot of people ask me, what do you think's happening? Was he always a neocon? Is he have pressure on him? What kind of pressure? How do they get him to do this? But I still hear him saying things that make me think that maybe he would like to be, a closer ally with Russia. But the media comes down so hard on him and beats up on him. Yeah, we did that, but what is it? But he's never criticizing Russia. But we need somebody that, on principle, believes that we should be non-interventionists, mind our own business, bring our troops home, have a strong national defense, and quit playing these games that we play. Too dangerous, too risky, and cost too much money. That's why we here in this panel, in this channel, we support a non-interventionist foreign policy. I thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.